Hi, welcome to Conversations with Elizabeth Ellen Carter. It is my absolute pleasure to be talking to Jude Knight, one of my fellow Bluestocking Belles. The Bluestocking Belles are a lovely collection of historical romance authors who come together for mutual support, for ideas, and also for sharing wonderful stories. So there's a number of collections out now. Check them out, and you'll be in for a treat next year as well with another fabulous collection. But it's not the Bluestocking Belles we're talking about today. We're talking about Jude's new release, To Tame the Wild Rake. Hello, how are you?
Hello, Elizabeth. I'm well, thank you, and I'm delighted to be here.
Fantastic. Now, we were chatting before, and I said my most experience with rakes at the moment are the gardening type. But of course, your rake is a very particular individual, isn't he?
Yes, known as the Merry Marquis since he was about 18, although his raking career started earlier than that even. He's been a character in my books since I published in 2016, 2015, a book called A Baron for Becky. And in A Baron for Becky came about in an interesting way. We were holding a month-long storytelling party to celebrate the launch of the Bluestocking Belles. And one of the other writers and I began this riff where we'd brought our rakes along to the party, and they started chatting up somebody else's courtesan. And that carried on for quite some time, and all kinds of things kept happening that stopped any kind of inappropriate behavior on the internet. So there was a lot of flirting, but not much else. That set the story going in my mind. And originally my plan was to have my rake and the good time girl go through all kinds of challenges for finally getting what they both wanted. But you know what it's like. I mean, I'm not a great plotter, and my stories go where they want to go. The plot elves demand, and I follow. And it turned out not to be the Marquis of Aldridge's book at all. It was very much Becky's book. And for the second half of it, it was Hugh Overton's. And discovered that his beloved mistress was carrying his child. He found her someone who wanted that child. And then, of course, it took a considerably dark trauma to where it was. So happy endings, we do happy endings. But halfway through the book, Aldridge got more or less abandoned. So having a rake at hand and one who was slowly beginning to see the error of his ways, I've let him wander in and out of other books, and he's been in at least 13 of my my books, novels, short stories, and novellas in the last 6 years.
This is the thing that I find really interesting, is you've got to know this character over this period of time, that someone that perhaps may not have been fully fleshed out when you first came up with him. Now that sort of he's been around for a while, sort of what elements have changed in his character over that time?
I think he's had, there've been many things that have developed. He has always had a strong sense of duty. Even as early as a baron for Becky, he got followed around by boxes of estate business. But he's had a very poor grasp of issues that are quite important in our modern day reader, like consent,
Mm-hmm.
And he's learned the hard way. He's fundamentally a kind person, and the most important people in his world are his mother and his sisters.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that a lot of rakes in romance, and the term, they're believed to be rakes, or they are what we today would be called players, but they're not. A rake was a guy who was very prepared to do anything and didn't much care about the feelings of others. Yeah. And so I wanted to redeem an actual rake, and that means pain for the rake, and that was my job.
What makes, well, we know the attributes that make a character a rake, but I mean, again, with Aldridge, he loves his mother and his sister, but he treats other women differently. Sort of, why is that, do you think?
I do believe that happens today as well, but certainly at the time, the heir to a duke, raised to think that he is raised by a rake, by a particularly nasty rake, raised to think that he's entitled to anything he wants, is unlikely to be anything except very self-centered. And I think the difference, if we can draw a difference between self-centered and selfish, I think a selfish person is going to go on being a rake. A self-centered person has a chance of actually waking his ideas up and becoming less self-centered. And particularly once he met Becky, and before him he met Charlotte, who was only a child at the time, but she later becomes his heroine. He begins to see women as people, and to understand the pain that selfish behavior on the part of men can cause them.
And again, sort of, there's this dichotomy there. He puts his mother and sister on a pedestal, and yet doesn't see other women as somebody else's mothers and daughters and sisters.
Right. He comes to over time, but he certainly doesn't to begin with. And in fact, I had great fun making him a big brother in Melting Matilda, where he is incredibly suspicious and protective, and at some point manages to threaten the hero of that book when he thinks his sister is not being treated with respect. So that was fun because that put him on the other side of the fence.
Yeah. How much fun has it been, or a challenge to actually sort of glacially reform Aldridge, because To Tame the Wild Rake is not, I get the impression, not the beginning and the end of his redemption arc. It's the in a way the tail end of his redemption arc, which has been evolving over the series of books.
Yes, and that wasn't actually my intention when I originally started out, but I'm happy that the whole action of the book takes place in a 6-month period, and I think to redeem a rake from a totally selfish and self involved playboy into a faithful husband in 6 months is just not going to happen.
Yeah.
No.
So it is years worth of self-reflection and life experience to create that redeemed character.
And so I had the challenge in To Tame the Wild Rake, and readers can tell me whether I achieved it or not, of reflecting on that evolution for the sake of readers who meet Aldrich for the first time in that book, without laboring the point.
Yeah. It's really interesting to take characters that we know so well. There's a literary character that I'm looking at writing an unofficial sequel to, on the basis of the name of this character has become a byword for selfishness and parsimony. Yeah, at the end of the story, he's a genuinely reformed character, but we only get to see half a chapter of it. But no, not even that. Maybe in the end, a dozen paragraphs that round it out, and it's a case of, well, yes, redemption comes, but once you reach that point, it's only the beginning of a forward journey afterwards. Sort of,
yes.
How do you not slip back into those selfish ways? And even conquering that, how do you then go on dealing with the expectations or the reputation that does carry with you? Do you explore that with Aldrich?
I do. He's been pretty much a reformed character for 3 years by the time the story starts. But he maintains his reputation because it's really useful keeping matchmaking mothers off his back. And of course, that has consequences because the heroine believes the stories.
Yes.
And is just not interested in a rake, even though she likes Aldrich as a person. So on several occasions, he finds that his reputation doesn't do him any favors with the respectable people. On the other hand, he's the heir to a duke. The duke is known to be dying. He's incredibly wealthy. He's very charming. He needs all the advantages he can get if he's going to go anywhere near marriageable females.
And there comes a point where a fellow wants to settle down, and yes, sort of a reputation to keep matchmaking mothers away is great until you want a match made.
And it also is an advantage and a disadvantage in that while he has been he's been out of the game for 3 years, there are a number of predatory widows and others who would very much like to find out what all the fuss used to be about. And so one scene in the book has him invaded. He is called to eject 2 naked women from his bedroom, which is, of course, the point at which the heroine bursts in on him to ask for help.
Oh, no.
So,
oh dear, that is going to take a lot of explaining.
I
love it.
So yes, the reputation is a mixed blessing. But I do mention in the book the Duke of Richport, who was a friend of Aldrich from his rake days, no longer a friend because of various actions. And at some point I intend to redeem the Duke of Richport, and I want to try doing that in his own book. So just, because you've got to challenge yourself, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, it is the classic Beauty and the Beast scenario that the love of a good woman and that incentive of a love of a good woman can lead men on the path to redemption.
And I believe that. I believe it. In order for it to be a redemption, it has to be something that they want deeply. But I think that knowing how, seeing themselves through the eyes of the woman they love can be enough to set their foot on that path.
Well, this is it. I mean, it strikes me as men innately want to be a hero. You know, it matches their drive. It provides an incentive forward, but finding what that actually means, and
Yes,
taking on the responsibility that inevitably comes from making a decision to be a better version of yourself
yes.
is a really fascinating place to explore.
And we're writing about a time in the Regency where the men of the upper classes did tend to be highly sexually experienced before they settled down, and many of them were not faithful husbands. And we need to, there's a bit of a balancing act to do for us as authors who believe in love, who believe in happy ever after, because we want that. We know that faithfulness and integrity and respect are crucial to a happy ever after.
It's absolutely integral to it. It's really interesting that sort of I'm finding myself increasingly comparing the aristocracy that we write about most typically in Regency, although I've tend to stay in the lower classes. I've only just written my first Jude, but a real comparison between celebrity culture
Yes.
and the aristocracy, because the aristocracy of the 19th century and in earlier eras were the tastemakers, were the style leaders, and yet nothing has changed. I describe Hollywood sort of celebrity marriages. It's sort of they're successful in dog years, sort of. that basically if somebody is married for you know 5 years before the inevitable celebrity divorce, well, I mean, hey, that's 35 years. It's sort of, well, that's the way it works. Do you think that it is the access to excessive wealth without the drive to do anything with it that is positive, but that relates to this, that it's the hedonism, which
The hedonism and that sense of I mean, no, in modern days we'd say they believe their own press releases.
Yeah.
And I do think there was a lot of that. If you're surrounded by people who tell you you're wonderful and that you know everything, and
Yeah.
that you're who jump at your every word, it must be quite difficult to come to terms with the fact that actually you're only a human being. And at the end of the day, we all rot in the same way.
Well, that's it. And yeah, the when you're being told that and you've got the funds to indulge in every vice, it takes a lot of strength of character. And I think that is something where historical romance is a great place to explore, because there is the sort of, well, what are the character building elements? What creates that strength of character that makes both the hero and the heroine much stronger, better versions of themselves by the time we do get to that happily ever after.
Yes, and I when I'm creating characters, I tend to start from where is the wound.
Yeah.
What injury to their soul or their mind has shaped the way they react to the world. And
yeah,
I think if you look at celebrity culture, you could do the same thing. Quite often, what we see as a totally hedonistic lifestyle is an escape from a wound.
very, very much so. And it's sort of having worked on the periphery of the entertainment industry, sort of in a previous life. Your actors, less so musicians, but definitely actors, frequently have a pain. And in fact, it was really, really interesting. I was watching an interview. A Scottish comedian was interviewing two British comedians and asked the question, well, how did you get into comedy? And he joked, oh, well, nobody gets into comedy when life is working really well for you. It comes from that sense of pain, and actors are very much of that, and it's a very rare, mature and not necessarily in age, a mature person who can be a well-rounded character when the wellspring of their creativity is actually been pain.
Yes, indeed. And we see that over and over. And I suspect it's strongly applied to the very, very wealthy in the period that we write about. I have a scene in A Baron for Becky where Aldridge has done something that's upset his father and is sent for. He and his friend Hugh had a bet. Someone had spoken dismissively of courtesans and their behaviour, and he had said that the women of the ton were worse. Yeah. And to prove it, he and his friend Hugh agreed to swive 2 women a day without repeating the position for a week. And by the end of the week, they have women lining up to be selected for the last. So they feel they've won the bet well and truly. And he's then sent to Haverford Castle for his father. His father doesn't care what he does as long as it doesn't draw adverse comment, which of course this did.
Yes.
And so I have a scene where he comes back. His mistress is waiting to tell him that she's pregnant, but she can't say anything. But he comes back, as he often does from seeing his father, desperate to, and the way I put it is to bury himself in his physical appetites.
Yeah.
And I think so even then I understood about Aldridge that a lot of this came out of his family situation. His mother was his parents' marriage was very unhappy. His mother was prevented from having much to do with him when he was born because that wasn't what a duchess did. He was never called by his first name. He was always called by his title. No one called him by his first name for most of his life until he met Charlotte. So he wasn't.
Wow.
So a lot of his background is that he sees himself as having no worth as an individual. His only worth is as the heir to a duke.
Wow, that is really, really interesting. Wow, there's some real depth, and isn't that fun as authors to explore that?
Very much, very much. So it is about understanding. It's not about agreeing with or justifying or finding acceptable behavior that is really very disgusting and disturbing.
Yeah.
But it is about understanding where it comes from.
And look, isn't that at the heart of everything? Because once you understand what that trigger point is, then you can then make the evaluation of well, you either sink right into it, but if you've got a shred of humanity and a desire for something better, then you use that, you emerge out of that slough of despond and then begin that hero's journey forward, which is
yes, there's
great
only
fun.
and that's there is only a slither of choice between being a hero and being a villain. There's a turning point. Yeah. They're both wounded.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But one wants to take revenge on the world for their wound, and the other wants to be happy.
Well, that's it, and I think you've hit on a really interesting point there, that a villain ultimately will blame others for his or her circumstances, whereas the hero will say, I now have a choice. I may have been dealt a really bad hand of cards, but I play the best I can over time to move forward out of that situation. And that's why I love romance as a genre, is because you can put characters through the mill. You can put them through really horrible life-changing situations, but because it's the redeeming power of love, not just in a relationship, but coming to peace and to terms with oneself, to become a desire to be the better version of yourself. To me, that embodies the happily ever after.
Absolutely. And I firmly believe, and have always taught our children and grandchildren, that blame is blaming others is very dangerous to your ability to respond. That if you give someone else the responsibility for your actions, you are giving them the power, instead of saying, this is what I can change.
Yeah, 100%.
So to a big extent, the villainess in my Return of the Mountain King series and the villain in my Return of the Mountain King series are counterparts to Charlotte, the heroine of To Tame the Wild Rake, and to Aldridge, the hero. They've both men have been through some very similar experiences as children. Both women have been through some very similar experiences in their family lives, but they choose different paths.
That is fun to explore too. Villains are great like that.
He's recycled too. He first appeared in Revealed and Missed, which was set in the same year as A Baron for Becky.
Right.
He's running a happy little business scheme in which he collects females and sells them overseas.
Oh, lovely. What
Charming
a charmer.
Fellow.
What a charmer.
And so this is about his third reinvention of himself. He every now and again he disappears. He has a whole heap of alter egos. He goes and disappears when things get too hot, and then comes back again.
Yeah.
But not after this. So he blew himself up in this book.
I like it.
It couldn't have happened to a more suitable candidate. My husband has always said villains should have terrible deaths.
Yes, absolutely. I remember getting a bad review on one of my books because the villain didn't die horribly enough.
Yes,
And it's
that
sort
would
of,
be that.
come on, I eviscerated him. Okay, the hero was really, really dangerously wounded himself, but the villain died. The hero lived.
Yes, so my first novel, Farewell to Kindness, the villain died in a carriage crash. The principal villain died in a carriage crash. There were about 5 villains, because it was my first novel, and one always there was absolutely no discretion going on whatsoever. And my husband, who was my first reader, said that's not enough. He's got to open the door of the carriage and have his brains smeared across a fence or something, because just dying in the carriage crash is not enough.
Well, you're absolutely right, because readers do feel cheated. Sort of, yeah. There's a proportionality going on. The greater the villainy, the greater the revenge. Even if the greater the death has to be, and it's interesting. I ended up watching the Guy Ritchie version of Sherlock Holmes for the first time last night, and he does this really, really well, because spoiler for anyone who hasn't seen it, the villain in that film gets caught very early on. He's hanged, or believed hanged, but then appears to come back from the dead. And the final showdown on London Bridge, which was still under construction, sees the villain again sort of hang as a result of his own actions and own misadventure. And it is the perfect story arc. Really, really well done.
Absolutely, every villain should contribute to their own death,
because that is so true to life. Because
yes.
Okay, you might have a villain die accidentally in some respects, but all of his choices leading up to that point bring him to that point in that place and time. So
yes,
yeah,
he's
even
there because of his
of all of
villainy.
those
I
things.
agree.
So is this the last we see of Aldridge? Oh, well, he and
Indeed
Charlotte.
not. He's
Oh,
now, of
good.
course, no longer Aldridge. He's Haverford. He has, at the end of To Tame the Wild Rake, he receives word that his father has died. Spoiler alert, it's the morning of his wedding. Or is it the night? Might be the night before his wedding. He is and he decides that he won't tell anybody except his mother, her uncle, and the Prince Regent, who is coming to the wedding. They marry by special license and are announced as the Duke and Duchess of Haverford. So that's the first anyone knows that it's actually the wedding has happened. So it is an interesting thing that while we like nice big weddings in our romances, I very seldom have them, because they very seldom happened in Regency England. As particularly the more it was far more common for a couple just to quietly slip away and get married and tell people about it afterwards. But yes, the Duke of Haverford is actually the sponsor and incidentally the half-brother of my hero in the book I'm writing for the Belles next set.
Oh, fantastic.
He is known as Lord Cuckoo because he was, as it were, planted in the Marquis of Heavenwood's nest by the Duke of Haverford, Aldridge's father.
Right.
So Lord Cuckoo is a half-brother to the Duke of Haverford. He has been pretty much cast out of Pevenwood's family as soon as he turned 18, and Aldridge paid for his commission in the army.
Mm-hmm.
And he's now come back from the army, and Haverford, as he now is, has sent him to York to investigate the industrial situation.
Yes.
So don't know yet whether we see Charlotte and Haverford. I've thought about it, but I haven't quite finished writing yet.
Mm-hmm.
But they're certainly referred to, and it will. I have in mind a series on Sons of the Duke, which Lord Cuckoo would form one of. There may be novellas,
mm-hmm.
but Haverford was a very nasty old man.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually dies of syphilis.
Yes, and that is a very nasty way to die.
Character.
Yeah, yeah.
But he has had no restraint his
Mm-hmm.
entire life.
Yeah.
And I cannot see a man like that failing to leave a litter of children right across the ton, as well as in all kinds of lower places. So we've seen some of them.
Yes.
His Aldridge's three half-sisters are all by
mm-hmm.
different mothers.
Yeah.
But there have to be. And his secretary is another, Fitzgrenford, as they call them.
Mm-hmm.
But there'll also be people like my Dom, Diomedes is his actual name.
Uh-huh.
My Dom, Lord Cuckoo, who are inserted into the ton and raised in other families.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that might be quite a fun series to write.
That
of course, my Aldridge come Haverford is going to have a part to play, because he has the strong sense of family. And if a half brother or half sister asks for his help, he's going to give it.
That really puts him in a very interesting place, then, in a way, becoming the patriarch of a new generation.
And a generation of people whose association with him has to be kept at least not public, although mm-hmm. obviously scandal being what it was,
yes,
and is, it will be known.
Yeah,
generally speaking.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing To Tame the Wild Rake and sharing Aldridge and Becky's story, and a great conversation about the nature of heroes and villains. It's been
fabulous.
Wonderful.
I'm giving you heaps of material and to weed through to decide what you can use. I'm very grateful. Thank you for inviting me.
This is going to be another long interview, and that's great. And thank you very much, Jude. Before we wrap up, tell everybody where people can find you. What's your website? What's the best social media to find you on?
The website probably is the best place. I'm trying to focus most of my my work there, and share from there to Facebook and Twitter and Pinterest and so on. So it's JudeKnightAuthor.com.
Fantastic.
And I blog 3 or 4 times a week. The Duchess of Haverford has tea. That's Aldridge's mother, has tea on Monday. She always has a guest for tea on Mondays. And I've also set up a website for the Haverford family. It's called haverfordhouse.com. So that was a recent venture, because I wanted some special way to note the fact that 6 years after Aldridge first appeared in print, he was finally having his happy ending.
That is wonderful. Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for watching Conversations with Elizabeth Ellen Carter. I'm endeavoring to post a new interview every week, every Tuesday, 11 o'clock Australian Eastern Standard Time. So check it out. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share this video and like the channel. That helps us reach more people who love great stories and historical romance. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.